You suck at trading. That's what I told myself when I realized just how much my emotions were controlling every single decision I made in trading. I thought my trading strategy was absolutely solid, but still every trade seemed to go against me and I was always second guessing myself. Finally, when I actually tried to control my emotions while trading, somehow things got even worse. Well, I luckily discovered 3 simple techniques that will solve this problem. So now that I can have trading weeks like this, where I make 10,000 on a single position on a systematic crypto strategy, and I can have trades like this, which are fully executed to the plan and are fully systematic. And with enough patience and time, these 3 techniques can help remove the majority of emotions from taking trades. Let me show you each one and give you some extra context around them. But just before I do that, let me just make my camera a bit smaller over here, and let's zoom in and let's get to it. So the first one, if we remove this red box, is backtesting. Now, backtesting is the foundation to any data-driven trading. And this is because to actually have a systematic strategy, first you need to quantify it. And then second, you need to see if it's actually something that's worked historically. And to do that, you need backtesting. Now, this isn't just running a quick scan or a manual backtest. It requires testing across multiple market cycles, ideally around 5+ years of data. Now, this does depend on your strategy frequency. For example, if you had a swing strategy and it was only taking 10, maybe 20 trades a year, then you'll definitely need more years of data. Now, you also want to include all costs. So this is commissions, slippage, spread, maybe short locates or funding rates if you're shorting in crypto. Now, I've pretty much traded all markets at this point over my 6 years of trading. And if you want a historical backtest to look good, just remove all costs. Most of the time, that will increase the success rate by 60 to 70% of at least having a pretty looking backtest. But will it work live? Probably not. You really do need to factor in these costs. They seem very minute. How does $2 per trade going to affect a profitable strategy? They definitely do, especially when you're racking up a lot of trades. Next, you want to use clean and survivorship bias-free data. Now, if you're wondering what survivorship bias-free data means, primarily the most common example is, let's say you're going long on equities. So this is on stocks. Now, historically, there's actually a lot of stocks that have been delisted. But if you pulled the current list of stocks that are available today and you went long on all of them, it's going to look a lot better historically than it would have if you had included the delisted stocks. So overall, you want accurate data as that point in time when you're taking that trade historically, and that's survivorship bias-free data. You also want to avoid look-ahead bias. So these are very common in manual backtests, just because when you're looking via the human eye, it's very easy to miss things or already see ahead a part of the chart and then make a decision based on that. This also can apply in code. For example, I've seen a lot of people when they're doing, a ChatGPT backtest, for example, it will use the close price when it's executing at the open, for example. So let's say it was making a decision on if the day ended green, then it's taking a long position, but it takes that long position at the open of that green day. That has obviously looked ahead biased and it's looking at the close of that day and then making a trade at the open of that day. There's also many other examples like that, but those are just very small ones where if you haven't been used to maybe coding a backtest or if it's your first time, those are ones to definitely look out for. Now, next, if we get rid of this box, is validation beyond typical backtesting. Now, a standard backtest is probably better than what 90% of traders do, especially when they're getting into trading. I know it's better than what I did in the first year, but you do want to go beyond it. A single backtest is most likely never enough for true validation. First, you want to use out-of-sample testing. Now, out-of-sample testing is where you're using data your strategy hasn't seen. Now, what does that mean? Let's say we have 5 years of historical data. First, we'll want to optimize that strategy a bit. Maybe we want to test out what different parameter values work better, for example, on a moving average crossover. But if you did that over all your data, then it's going to be a very high chance of overfitting. Overfitting means where you found the best possible outcome based on noise in that historical data and not actually on something that's like a true signal. So what we do to prevent this is we split the data. We say, well, if you've got 5 years, you can use 2.5 years to optimize first. And then whatever parameter values you find from there on that 2.5 years, you then test on the last 2.5 years and see what performance actually looks like. Now, this is a very simple example, but hopefully this gets the point across. Next is we have Monte Carlo simulations. This is to understand the range of possible outcomes that can happen on a particular strategy. Now, historically, if you only look at the original backtest, that's just one sequence of the trades that can happen. But you can never predict the next trade if that's going to be a win or loss, for example. So what we want to see with a Monte Carlo is how does resequencing those trades actually look and affect performance. So just to give you a quick example here, here's one Monte Carlo backtest. Now, this is a resample method. Resample method, just simply put, means that out of all the historical trades that have been taken, it can pick any one of them and it can pick the same one again, meaning it could, for one of these simulations, pick the worst trade 5 times. Now, is this realistic to happen in the live market? Maybe not as much, but we want to see what it would look like on drawdown, performance, etc. And we want to see what the average performance is of all of those Monte Carlos. Now, the next test is probably one of my favorite, and it is the parameter sensitivity analysis. Now, simply put, this really does help to make sure that you're not overfitted. It's not the only test I would do, but it's definitely one of my favorites. What it looks like is it's either a heat map, so like this, or a 3D surface graph. For the most part, they look the same and do the same thing. It's just a different way of visualizing the data. Now, for this particular example, we have two parameters. So we have a look back period and we have another look back period down here. And we can see the darkest blue means the highest performance, so the highest P&L, and kind of yellowish color is the lowest performance. We can see there's a nice region over here where all the highest performance is coming from and everything else is pretty low performance. Now, what you're looking for in a parameter sensitivity is you're trying to make sure that performance isn't sporadic, meaning that it isn't in random places. So if I just use a blue color over here, if I highlight this area and this area and this area, this heat map now shows a completely different picture. This shows that for whatever reason, there's performance clusters at these random kind of parameter values and not all in just one region. This means it's more likely for the strategy to be overfitted because there is a lot of noise obviously coming from this particular parameter values. Whereas what we have right here, if I just get rid of these, is a nice clustering where we can see the optimal performance is at 40-40 for this look back period, but then it slowly fades off. Now, ideally, you'd want this to be a bit blue and it kind of like fades down, right? But this is just a quick example that I could bring up. What you're looking for here is that you haven't picked just one lucky parameter value that it has all of a sudden got the best performance and everything else is just completely rubbish. Because if you do see that, it's most likely you've overfitted to historical noise. Now, the last one is stress testing. So this is primarily where you're testing for extreme market conditions to understand your risk and leverage. Now, everyone doesn't like to assume that the worst will happen, but at least historically, there's normally a bad event every 2 to 3 years, give or take, in the markets. The most recent one was the tariffs. That was a 20%, I think, drop on SPY, which would have pushed and liquidated a lot of people's positions. By stress testing historically, you can see, well, how would I survive these? Or how could I minimize the damage? And that's why this test is really important. Now, these tests do take time and effort, but these tests give you the confidence to stick to your system when it matters most. I thoroughly believe, as this has been the case for me and many other people I've met, if you put in the time into your strategy of testing and you have logical reasonings why it should work, you're not going to be undisciplined and take a random trade because you have so much conviction and you have put time and effort behind it. Now, the next one, which is also incredibly important, is systematic execution. Now, this is the final piece from removing yourself from the equation. You want to create clear, objective entry and exit rules. You want to define position sizing based on risk, not on emotion. And I would also say you want to automate as much as possible. Now, I personally run a fully automated portfolio, so that's 10 futures automated strategies, which run on like ES, NQ, etc. And this really does eliminate second guessing. I'm never looking at my computer when it's taking normally a trade. I'm doing something else. Maybe I'm coding, maybe I'm outside. But this leads me into the second point. Even if you do have it automated, you have to make sure that you let your system work without interference. Now, on the daily operations, that's quite easy to do when it's automated because you're not sitting at the computer all day and clicking buttons. But when you go into a drawdown, for example, of 10%, maybe 20%, depending on what you're trading, you're still going to have some emotions there. And this is why this guide is great for taking out emotions from taking trades. But overall, you will still have to cope with some emotions on a portfolio side of things or on a strategy side of things where you're going to go into drawdowns. But I will say, and this is at least for me, a hill I'm willing to die on is that if you went through all this trouble and you went through all this backtesting and tests, etc., you're going to have more conviction holding that strategy during the tough time. I know for sure if I hadn't done all the testing behind my own strategies, if I got into maybe a 5-10% drawdown, I'd be worried sick. I'd be thinking, oh, is the strategy no longer working? Maybe I need to change parameter values. Maybe I need to find a whole new strategy. But if you've put in the time and effort behind it and you've seen what's possible and what's standard for a drawdown, for example, it gives you so much more conviction. Now, this approach removes the need for discipline because the decisions are no longer really yours to make. They're logical decisions that you have data behind and you understand why you're making them. Now, I've put all of these principles and how to do them and the exact code templates I use personally for my own strategies into the Backtest Bootcamp. It's the first link in the description if you're interested and you want to be more systematic in your trading.